Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
That we could actually be attacked, that somebody would come at us like that, was an unknown experience. And of course, the reaction was to stand up and defend ourselves.
There were two couples of us in a car, and we heard about it on the car radio, and everybody knew that it was the end of our lives.
It was a sunny day. It was Sunday afternoon, and we were going to Worthington, and on the radio they said Pearl Harbor is bombed. At that time, had no idea what Pearl Harbor was or where it was.
The teachers really didn't tell us too much about what was going on. I'll never forget this teacher. She was a little redheaded teacher, and I don't know if she had taught her first or second year, but she was very dramatic. I should also explain that our first class was kind of our homeroom, and that was our homeroom teacher, and she was an English teacher. And she just said, "Oh, Japan has attacked Pearl Harbor, and we're going to be at war." And all of us young, like I said, that was it. The next teachers never said anything, nothing was said afterward. I really don't think the war sunk into our heads until we started seeing young men being drafted, young men being sent away. Then I think it began to dawn on us, hey, maybe this is something we should maybe take more seriously.
I was in the first group that was drafted from Freeborn County. I had never been away from home before, and it was really an experience.
I had started looking for a job in San Diego immediately, and I first found a job with a small real estate company. It was very small. We had a tiny office in a little house, and I was to be Girl Friday and build a fire when I came in the morning and sweep the floor and do the calling and do the typewriting and everything else. Well, 1 month of that was enough. So then I went to the Navy.
I was 19. On my 19th birthday, I enlisted. And I had never been out of southern Minnesota except to go to Chicago once in a while because I was only 80, 90 miles from Chicago. And I was put on a train and went to New York City, and I went to Hunter College in the Bronx to boot camp. I really, really liked being in the service, though. And I didn't meet, the age limit was 19 to 36. And I can remember being with a teacher that was 36. She was at the limit, and man, did everybody think she was an old lady. How could she do that stuff? I can remember boot camp when I had to have all the shots, and I don't think I'd ever had a shot in my life, and every time I had one I fainted, passed out cold, but I never had a reaction, and lots of other people had reactions. I remember regimental drills, and if one person close to you fainted, everybody around them fainted, but if no one fainted, I mean, it took one to do it. And we used to have to stand maybe for 2 hours at attention at regimental reviews. I mean, it was the same basic training, except we didn't shoot guns. And The only other thing was my mother was really, really ashamed of the fact that she had a daughter in the Navy, because at that time, females in the service had a horrible reputation. And I didn't meet a bad one the whole time I was there, you know, and she wouldn't put up a service flag because she really didn't want anybody to know where I was.
The next day, instead of going to work, I went down to Mankato to join the Navy. Well, there's a recruiting station down there. But they weren't ready to take applicants or anything. So as it turned out, my friend did make the Navy, but they wouldn't take me because I'm blind in one eye. So I was in what they called a railroad operating battalion.
Number 42, when I came home, then I told my mother, it's time for me, and I went to the board, the draft board, and they said, yeah, you have to, we'll be calling you within most any time, you know, after the month of October, they said. Well, I didn't want to go to the Army. I didn't tell them, so I told my mother and my brother that where I was going to go. I was going to join the Marine Corps. When I was a kid, I met a person from Heartland area. He was a farm boy, and I was shocking grain at that period of time, and he was in the Marine Corps, and he came home on furlough, and so he was wearing his blue trousers, khaki shirt, white cap, and he came to see his folks while I was working there, and I can recall his dad saying, "The damn kid don't want to work." That's why he joined the Army. That's what he called it, you see. But I like his uniform, you know. And he told me what he used to do. He used to work at the embassy at Washington, D.C., perform guard duty and things of that nature. And I said to myself, that's the kind of job I want. I don't want to go out in a trench warfare like I had seen pictures of. No, that wasn't for me.
A recruiter from Washington came to try and get girls to go to Washington, D.C. to work and replace the men that were gone. And we didn't go then. There were 4 of us girls that went later. We went in July. We had to spend a little time in the cities kind of learning the job first, and then we transferred out to D.C. The government paid for our train ride out there, and they found us jobs, and they also found housing for us.
I was drafted when I was 19. I fought the draft for 2 or 3 years. I didn't do well in high school, and I knew that if I went in before I graduated, I'd never go back to school. I just didn't have it mentally for doing that kind of things. One thing that I did, my folks had a general store, kept the place going, and I ate any kind of a cookie that I could find that had lots of sugar and lots of fat in it. I was trying to gain 5 pounds so I could get into the Marine Corps, and I couldn't gain 5 pounds, and I did that for 2 years. So I was happy I wasn't a soldier. Very happily, I enjoyed getting in the Navy.
When I was living in Germany, I was a child with 12 years old at that time. My father was a government employee, and he went to the Nazi party or quite late. This was late in 1939. Since he was a government employee and they occupied Poland, they took some people from Germany to run the railroads, post office, and all this type of things in Poland. So he was one of the first one after Germany took Poland to move into to help occupy the post office. This was in 1942. In 1942, later on, he took his whole family to Poland, and we had an apartment there and we were living. I went to school there.
We were, as I told you, we're from northeast Iowa. Alameda County is one of the 3 poorest counties in the state of Iowa. Was and still is. Our goal was to get out of that county. We knew that the only way we sometimes could do it would be going into the military service. So we had kind of mixed feelings. If the war is over and we don't get called into service, we're going to be trapped here for the rest of our lives. We were getting to the point where we were going to have to be drafted. We were watching now, I was watching especially the war in Europe, and I was watching the war in the Pacific. February 12th, the next year, in 1945, I was now eligible to be called into the draft. My number came up, and my dad went up and said, could you let him graduate from high school? And that was a blessing now as I look back. I was called in August, and then the atomic bomb was dropped, and that changed the whole scene right then and there.
We traveled to Minneapolis. We got to Minneapolis sometimes in the afternoon at the Marine Corps office there at what is known as a federal building right across from what maybe it's still there, the Milwaukee Depot on Washington Street. So we got there, and they talked to us, they gave us a voucher, and they told us where we would stay. They gave us a pass to go to the Minnesota Hotel, which wasn't very far away from there. They gave us two vouchers for lunch, one for supper and one for breakfast. And then you gotta be here the next morning at a certain time. Well, we don't want to be left behind. We get there, and I thought we were the only 6 or 7 people. The following morning, I was surprised that there were more people around from different parts of South Dakota, Minnesota. Anyway, we went out and ate, came back. They gave us an examination. They found out we were breathing, so we were okay. But they did reject 2 people from joining the Marine Corps because on account of their feet. They were from South Dakota. And they turned around in the next fall and joined the Navy. So then everything's going. Finally, after they had checked a number of people, all of us, quite a few, you know. Now, I didn't know that, but there were some other people staying someplace else that they had already checked because we were all going to leave together, but I didn't know at that time. So must have been around 5 o'clock, just before supper time, they had checked everybody. So of this particular group. So now there's about 20 of us by that time, and I didn't know where they came from, but they had already been checked. So we go in this room. Now, let me say, I'll backtrack. Before that, we just walked to the depot, come back. The guys, at that time, people smoke, you know, and just taking a good time, you know, come and go because we know what we had to do. So then we raised our hand to defend our country at about 5 o'clock, you know. So then they put it down and says, now we're ready to go. We're ready to go. Get whatever little belongings we had. They said, we're going to go and eat supper. Guess what? They said, step outside on the sidewalk. Once we step out on the sidewalk, you just didn't walk like you did before. You formed in line. We got us in line, typical Marine Corps line. We marched to the depot, had our lunch. They told us where to wait. We formed. We walked along the tracks where we boarded the train. Yeah, after we took our obligation, we were in the Marine Corps. Now you just did things your way, not our way. Yeah, that's when I gave my soul to the United States government.
We got out and dressed and one thing and another. We went to breakfast, and they had us line up in one of the halls. But anyway, we counted off 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Number 1 will be in the Army. Number 2 will be in the Navy. Number 3 will be in the Marines. And now raise your right hand and we'll swear you in so you're officially in the military service.
When we left Albert Lea, we went to Fort Snelling. And from Fort Snelling, we got on a troop train and went out to Riverside, California, where they're called Camp Han. The ocean was so still when we went over, you could have rowed a canoe all the way over. But it was a little rough on the way back, but it never bothered me.
Oh, so we went over on one of those old Liberty ships, and I was so seasick. You just can't believe how seasick I was.
Either the first or second week of 1943, they sent me to what is known as the war zone in the Pacific. I really did not know where I was going. None of us did, really. And they placed us on the Macedonia at the Merchant Marine ship. And it was a luxury liner, and they converted to a troop carrier. In that Pacific ship, again, being a Merchant Marines, we had waiters. We ate in a dining room of the unit. They had round tables, white linen cloths, and we had waiters that come and serve us for 37 days. Boy, we really had it made.
We had trouble. We had an apartment in San Francisco, and we had trouble getting some. But I was a real good friend of the cooks, and they would draw rations in the morning, and probably the troops would leave, and here they had all this food. So I got some of that food to take home, like sugar and meat and stuff like that was rationed. Went out on the road to hitchhike. They would pick you up and they say, where do you want to go? And not where they were going. So it was real nice.
Girls used to hitchhike some, which I did once. So it was only with a bunch of girls. And it was not a wonderful experience because it was just one man in the car, but we didn't know where he was going. But they'd hitchhike to some of these little towns around for eats and so on.
We all collected things, you know. There were scrap drives, there were tin can drives, there were rubber collections, because we didn't have rubber for tires.
We were in a port city, and so the food we had was pretty good. We managed to see that we got good food. I never ever complained about chow. You can imagine frying eggs on a field kitchen for 250 guys. They hadn't seen eggs for years and years, and you get some cold storage eggs. You got one of those field kitchens, and you're trying to fry eggs the way they want them. Every one of them, because they had time. We want them certain ways, you know. 250 guys wanted their eggs. Everybody wanted them differently.
1944, further up, there was no way Germans could do anything with the airplanes anymore because they came every day, and they were, you had more. Germany ran out of gas. They had no fuel for the planes, so this was ridiculous just to send the plane up there. And so they could come in without, the only thing what they could do, shoot at them with certain guns, and that was very, very dangerous for them because the moment they shot, they knew exactly where they were, and they come and attack them right with the fighter planes.
We wore whatever we wanted to, but we wore anklets. You know, we couldn't get stockings or anything.
Silk stockings were rationed, yes, because silk was grown in Japan.
The first thing I did was, my dad was a heavy, heavy smoker. I never saw him without a cigarette in his hand. And I could always get cigarettes, and he couldn't. So when I got close enough, I supplied him. And he died of lung cancer at 53, and I learned, you know, that I was an enabler, but boy, I didn't know it at that time. And I supplied them a lot with a lot of things while I was in the service and got close to home because I could shop and they couldn't.
Up to the last minute, we all believed, and I tell you, not all, I don't want to say that because we believed we win the war. We have big weapons coming up there, and they will bring this in the end, and Germany will win the war. I remember before the French came into the village I was. My grandfather told me, you stay here because we lost the war, you're not going back. We lost the war. I said, grandfather, you are a traitor. We did not lose the war yet. But he said, you know, they almost entered the front door. Then he said, forget about it. Then he didn't talk anymore, but he put me in place. But I told him he's a traitor because I feel really bad about that, but that's how it was. The kids were so indoctrinated with that thought that we all believed. It was always, you know, at that time, even we as Germans were thinking, we hope the Western allies get Germany and not the East. So they were much more resistant to the Russians, that they come in than to the West. So many times they did hold more to the East, they hold them up and made it easier, or they took more troops that way, just to hold up the Russians.
We were leaving, like I said, on the third day, on the 22nd of November '43, at about 11 o'clock. We were on this fenced area of Tarawa, and at about 11 o'clock, this Japanese came over the top of this bunker. A guy said there must have been about 100, but I think there was only about 25. And I opened up with a machine gun, and I'm pretty sure I knocked quite a few of them from what I hear, but I wasn't the only one. Just as I opened up with my machine gun, the other people also opened up, and it must have lasted about 30 seconds. Yeah. But before that, the reason is because they threw a hand grenade, and I didn't see them. They threw a hand grenade, and it landed on my area, and I got hit on my legs at that time, and they opened up with rifles, and then I got 2 bullets right in here, you see, right here. You see, and they went right straight through, you know, because you can hardly see the scar. And this is where I was, you see. And when it was secure, then they helped me out, and they took me back to what we know is a shell crater, where it's about this deep, and this is where they use it as an aid station, put it that way. And then the corpsman wrapped me up, and then the following day, the island was declared secure at around 10 o'clock.
Tail end of 45, there was 3-4 of us fellas bowling that were in the galley working together. And we were out bowling, and this particular night there were 3 waves. And we all thought they were officers, the way they were dressed. They had on slacks on, and they had short sleeve blouses on, and they didn't have any caps on. We didn't see any caps laying around, and curiosity got the best of me, and I walked over and introduced myself. None of the other fellows would go with me. Anyway, I met these 3 gals, and we talked for maybe a half an hour, and finally I asked Charlie. She was a short brunette, the other 2 were blondes. I asked her if she'd like to have coffee someday. She says yes.
We were stationed at Riverside, California, and we were on maneuvers in San Francisco, and we got there about the first part of December, and then, of course, the war broke out, and we stayed there, and we had these big anti-aircraft guns, and we stayed there for over 3.5 years. And we got married there at an old fort. It's Fort Scott. It was an old World War I fort. And we were married there in December of '42.
Sentimental Journey was my favorite song, and Doris Day came out with that, I think, in June of 1944. It's still my favorite song. I took my music out to D.C. with me and had a boyfriend out there that I went to his mother's house and played the piano for him and so on. He rode motorcycle, which was my wonderful thing, and after work sometimes I'd go on the motorcycle with him, and he worked for RCA, so he delivered cablegrams to the different embassies. in DC, and I'd go along with him for that, which was fun. We were from Albert Lea, which was all white people or something, and there was one African-American girl that went out with us. She worked in the cities. She had a boyfriend who was a lieutenant in the Army, and I don't think she wore the same dress the whole time we were there, so she had to be well off. But when we got to DC, we had to go someplace to get TV shots or something. I don't remember. And on the way back, we stopped at this little restaurant that was no place, and they would not serve her. They wouldn't. I don't remember if she could even come in the restaurant, but they would not serve her. And of course, we were all very upset because we'd never heard of such a thing. And we decided we were going to leave. We weren't going to eat there if she couldn't. But she said, you know, let it go, let it go. She said she'd just wait for us, and she did.
I was in school in Georgia. The town really didn't accept the female Navy in there. There was a military academy there, but of course all of the older students had been drafted. It went through college, so they were all high school or younger. And the worst thing that we could do was to walk downtown from the campus without calling one of those young students to escort us, because nice young ladies did not walk down the street by themselves. Blacks still had to step off the sidewalk when we walked, and all of a sudden I realized there was prejudice.
USOs were very, very important. My other job I did down there, on Sunday mornings, they would have a checker tournament. And there was a little old guy from Brooklyn who was a checkers expert. And he would come. We would have the tables, like your tables here, tables set out in a big square. And he'd stand in the middle, and I'd be in the middle. And he would walk around from one person to the next and move a checker. And whoever managed to crown him or whatever it was, king him or whatever, they'd get a candy bar from me. Whoever won, who managed to beat the man, you got a free dinner. So these were ways we helped our boys get through this time of waiting to see if they would be shipped out.
Like, they didn't bring men to dance with waves. We had to dance with the servicemen. But that was okay, because there were never enough females for the males that were there. But I was a Missouri Synod Lutheran, which means I don't dance. I've never learned how to dance, but the food was so good, and we could stay in the hotels for nothing, and I think we mostly went for the food, to be honestly truthful.
There were several USOs in San Diego County. One of them, one major one, was in the YMCA, the Army and Navy YMCA, at the foot of Broadway, near the harbor. And it was a several stories high building. The men could stay there if they had leave, and they had to have a hotel room somewhere. But we also had a weekly dance. And the girls that served there were kind of organized into a club. And we would take charge of having a theme for the dance, designing the decoration of the dance hall, and then they would get an orchestra from one of the bases around, either from the Marine base or some other, and put on this dance. It was usually on a Friday night, and any serviceman would come, and just like any other dance. They had a little room off from the dance hall with telephones in it, and they would allow the men to call home on the telephone, and that was very expensive in those days, and they couldn't talk too long, but there were always lots of men in there, and they loved it. I mean, they were homesick. they were young, very young, especially fellows right out of boot camp there in San Diego. They'd have the short haircuts, and they'd go in flocks because they needed each other.
There were, no matter where we were, there were hotels, like right down on Michigan Boulevard, there were 2 of them. 2 of the hotels were totally for service people, and yes, Waves utilized those facilities just like the males. There was a lot of entertainment. I met, oh, I can't tell you how many movie stars I met. Gene Kelly, I remember, was one of them, and they'd come to the base there really a lot and put on shows. Well, he was stationed there. Gene Kelly was stationed at Great Lakes for a while too, because a lot of them were in the service. So that was a really good thing.
I used to go to another USO in the east part of town, which was similar, but we would ride the streetcars to get there, and then one other that was interesting. One night they needed some girls to dance with the boys at another USO, and so they came and got a few girls from the Army Navy Y and took us in a Jeep with no cover and drove across town, and I guess we had a good time. I don't remember.
I had a cousin from Decorah, Iowa, that was a junior lieutenant in the Navy, and Jean, one of the girls I worked with, her boyfriend was a senior lieutenant in the Navy. Well, my cousin happened to be in D.C. that weekend, and so we decided to double date. We were going to a movie, and then we were going to the Statler Hotel for supper. Well, they stopped the movie. I don't remember what the movie was, but they stopped it right in the middle and said the president was dead. The funeral procession went down Constitution Avenue, and we could look out our office windows and see the parade. The casket was pulled by, I don't know if it was 6 or 8 white horses, and there were servicemen standing just a few feet apart all the way down, and there weren't any bands, and there weren't any flowers, no music or anything. It was a very solemn affair.
I do remember hearing, but I know we were pretty saddened to hear that, because it went, oh, what are we going to do? Our beloved leader is gone.
We heard on the radio that Franklin Delano Roosevelt, they didn't say anything, and we didn't say anything. So we went to school the next day, and the teacher said, well, we lost a great president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And they were telling us about all the accolades that he had done and all that stuff. Well, anyway, I went home that night from school, and I'll never remember, and Mother said, I am getting so sick and tired of hearing what they're saying on the radio. You'd think that Christ had died.
I remember when President Roosevelt died, I was standing in line in my barracks waiting for mail call, and they announced over the PA system that the president had just died, and you know, he was in his 4th term. And we thought that was going to be the end of everything too. What's going to happen?
And it was exciting, but I think that I was in San Diego at that time. And I stayed in a private home which had rooms for working girls out there in California. And the landlady fixed a real special dinner and all the best china and silver and everything. And the girls in the house all came to dinner, and we had a celebration, and it was very wonderful. It wasn't quite as raucous as VJ Day.
The last day of the war, which was May 8th or 9th, we were there in the place. It was a small village in the Black Forest, and in the meantime we were on the streets again and walking around and all this, and the French soldiers sometimes came through the town to the village, sometimes not, and so it was not that things. One day before out, it was, I think it was the 8th or 9th it was, suddenly the guns went off, and the Germans had no guns anymore, but the French soldier was there in the hills and all this, and they shot a lot of flare bullets all over the place, and we stand, it was almost like a fireworks, and you know, we didn't see fireworks anyway, it's this type of fireworks. And then everybody was standing around and looking up there, what happened, what happened? Nobody knew what happened, until the rumor came through, oh, it's the end of the war, they just capitulated in France and signed this paper, and now these occupational troops of the French celebrated that day. That's how we found out the war was over. We didn't know otherwise. It was not in a big newspaper, it was not, because we had nothing. There was hardly a newspaper around in April, May in Germany. There was nothing actually. And what was on the radio, there was not much either, because nobody knew what to say and what to say. You know, there was not much.
I shouldn't say this, but the people in Germany were nicer to us than some of the French. So I guess they kind of resented, you know, the Americans in their beautiful city. But no, they treated us okay. I mean, there weren't anything that was too unhappy. But you know, you have a feeling of, well, okay, get out of here now, the war's over, go home.
You have to understand, in Germany we had French prisoners of war, we had Polish people which they took from Poland then to work on the farm, we had Czech people, we had Russian people there, and suddenly, you know, they felt free, you know, and they went all in the street. The Germans couldn't go in the street anymore, but all these foreign workers, they were all over the street, and some was a little ugly because they turned in certain people, and that was ugly because they are. But then it was not so nice, because was constantly told us through the street, we have to bring all the bicycles up to the city hall, all the cameras, and surely all the guns, everything was available. We had to bring to the city hall, and they packaged it, and this was there. They had hundreds of bicycles in front of the city hall, and then some of them got a little friendlier with the French, and they could pick bicycle. Now, sure enough, that was not sitting with the other people. Oh, that's my bicycle. How come he drives it now? And so they got bad blood. They had the French flag in front of the bicycle. All bad blood.
We were kind of horrified at the way it had to end. That's really all I thought about that. The idea that we dropped the atom bomb made me sick at my stomach just to think about it. And, you know, a mixed feeling of being proud of our country, thankful that this was over, and horrified that we had done this. So, and there's really no way out of that dilemma, really, except that we've been trying all these years to do something better.
Yeah, the bomb was dropped in Nagasaki. The first bomb was in Hiroshima on the 3rd, I think, of August. The second one, I can't remember if it's either the 6th or the 9th of August, but it was a couple of days later. They dropped the second bomb in Nagasaki. And then it would be a month later before I would land. I got to see what the second atomic bomb did in the city of Nagasaki. You can sit on top of the mountain and look down to the city, and it's just like when you make a fire on a lawn. You see, that's the way I can remember it. Yeah, and I walked by it, right there where you know, when they were putting a marker so you wouldn't be over on kind of the, what do you call it? Radiation, right. No concern about radiation. I mean, we hadn't even heard what the heck it was, you know. We walked right up when they were setting up the air because we were one of the first battalions to land, you see. And from there we walked to the Japanese barracks, which was about 6 or 7 miles away. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I did get engaged to someone in my graduating class that joined the Navy the day he graduated from high school, and he was a radio man on a ship, the Liscomb Bay, and it was sunk in the Midway Island chain. It was the first escort carrier to be sunk during the war, and it took me over 60 years to find out what happened to that ship. And my brother, who was a pilot, and I'm 10 years older than my brother, so he was in the Navy at a time not during the war, but he was always interested in the historical research of anything, and he found what happened to that ship that my fiance was on, and it turned out that it was sitting off an island, and it not only had, it was an escort carrier, so it only carried 37 planes. And, but it was also carrying ammunition for the troops that were landing at that time. And a sub hit it, and it had totally sunk within 23 minutes. And when I think that it took me 60 years to find this out.
War is bad, especially, I serve as an infantryman. I'm the guy the first guy and the last guy. I'm the first guy to go in, the last guy to be served any food or water, because they have to get to us, you know. All the other guys are unloading, and they can take care of themselves. I mean, they're troops, they're helping us. Let's face it, I fought a mean war. We killed the Japanese brutal. But you know what? After it was over, you know that we didn't talk about it. We just sit there and enjoy training. And we used to, you know, we used to get upset because now we have to go out and walk again. We did a lot of walking. They trained us and we go out there. But we had fun in one sense, you know, when we're in the island, because it wasn't strict. We didn't have to have no uniform, you know, like this. And I saw some good and bad. For example, the heat, the flies. You open up a can of food, you know, and you had flies. You never knew where these flies had landed against a dead body. Seeing bodies, you know. One day we didn't know how long we were going to be there, for example. And the guy says at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I think they found out that we were going to be there overnight or a couple of days, because you move. Sometimes we move day by day. Anyway, we had killed 11 guys at night. And so the guy said, bury them. So we bury them, we drag them and bury them. We put them about this much dirt. We didn't know it, but we stayed there for 4 days. On the 4th day, you could actually see the dirt move. Maggots. We call it rice, you know. And so you never knew where this flies. And you had to be careful, because the doggone fly would beat you to the, you know, take your spoon. You had to be, yeah, honestly, it was just terrible. I mean, and no prisoners. We were cruel. You know. It's cruel, especially the way the war that I served in. There isn't a day that I don't see this man's face. A person by the name of a person that was in my machine gun section, who was my squad leader when I joined the unit on New Zealand. I'll never forget that Lewis and I were laying here with a machine gun. We can't see, and he says, I'll move over there about 20 feet. And there's a crater near the airstrip of this particular area, so he could get a better line of fire. He says to me, Lewis and me, he says, you guys look at me, and when I'll get over there, take a look, see if I can, and I'll give you the highball, and you come over and join me, so we can set the machine gun to get better line of fire, because from where we were, we couldn't see very, very well. And guess he gets over there, it's pretty common, you have your rifle support, and you look up like this, and we're looking like this, you know, and I can still see the bullet go right through his face, like this, right here. And he stayed like that, maybe for about a minute, then he fell down. I can still see that. I still see that.
I think the most impressionable thing that ever left in my mind was when we were in Naples, Italy. And this was even 4 years, about 4 years, it was in January 1949. We were in Naples, Italy. Now, Italy had, now this is when I saw the aftermath of the war. I walked in, one of the guys had bought a nice, what do you call it, hoagie sandwich, you know, one of those hoagie sandwiches. And these little kids came along. All these little kids, boys and girls, there must have been about a half a dozen of them, a dozen. And they said, can we have something to eat? Can we have something to eat? And he threw it on the street, the sailor did. And these little kids went and fought like little cats and dogs after that. And I thought, is this the aftermath of the war? Yes, these were little orphan kids. Their dads had been killed, their mothers had abandoned them. Then, make a further impression, I went over to Greece. We went to Greece, and here we saw hundreds, literally hundreds of soldiers, Greek soldiers, who had one leg or were in the wheelchair and stuff. And that was when it really hit me about the wars.
A sailor that Lucy had gone out with, she and I and these two sailors had gone to a movie, and this one had to get up and leave because he'd been on a ship that had been sunk, and he couldn't stand to stay in the theater. He left.
When I left Hawaii on the 26th of 1944, the 1926th of 44, I got aboard this tin can. I put on my dungarees. We didn't have nothing but ammunition. That's a special unit. That's the reason. I never changed. I had the same clothes on. Never washed them until sometime in August. Yeah. Never took a bath in between that time. Yeah. It's unbelievable what you can do with the body. This is why they have young kids. You know, that's why they have young kids.
Being called at 5 o'clock in the morning, that is still with me today yet. It's in my mind someplace there. Why it is, I don't know. But 5 o'clock in the morning, I'm up. Like this morning, I tried to sleep until 6 o'clock. After 25 minutes, I said, forget it.
And they used to have set up a speaker where they could play music for us. You know, big speaker, and we listen to the music, be playing the old, music of its day, you see. And that's how, and that's from where they announced it, you know. And nobody made hardly any noise. You know, oh, yeah, it's good, now we can go home, you know. Yeah.
That evening, I was back in Albert Lea then. That evening, a lot of people were uptown just more or less celebrating that the war was over, and which was a wonderful thing regardless.
We left San Francisco on the boat, and I think we were going to Japan. I'm not sure. And then before we got to Japan, the war ended, and the ship made a big turn and went back towards San Francisco. It went a little bit and it turned around and went. And then we landed in the Philippines rather than in Japan. Yeah.
Okay, I'm still in San Diego, and I don't know how Albert Lea was doing because I had lost touch, you know. But I was living there in the same private home, I think. anyway, somehow we all knew we had to get downtown and join the celebration. And in the plaza, if anybody knows San Diego, it's the center of everything. And it was just jammed with people. We probably went down on a streetcar and mingled with the crowd. And we've probably seen this picture of the sailor that's holding the girl and she's leaning over and kissing her. Well, that's how it was, the whole thing.